Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. If you want to take your seats. I was just telling Dean Slaughterbeck and David Greene that all angle sessions, there is some walking around. As you know, we always try to accommodate your class schedules, and we know it's really hard to hit that sweet spot during the day. So students can come in a little bit late and leave a little bit early to get to your classes on time. But just remember, be as quiet as you can as you're doing it. We appreciate it. So thank you for being here. My name is Samantha Balbier. I am the director of the Institute of Politics and the Elsie Hillman Civic Forum. Just quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with the IOP, we have 3 units. The Elsie Hillman Civic Forum runs 9 student programs, serving about 1,000 students per year. We offer a ton of internships with community organizations and elected officials. In our other unit is called Regional Policy Collaborations, and we work with civic leaders and elected officials from across Western Pennsylvania to tackle some of the region's most toughest issues. And in our Thornburg Forum for Law and Public Policy, we offer thought-provoking education sessions that are open to the public. There is one happening tomorrow at noon with Russell Muirhead, who wrote on governing. That takes place in the law school. As part of the Elsie Hillman Civic Forum and in partnership with the Chancellor's Office, the All Angles program was launched in 2022. And the goal of the program, it was built to provide students with a multitude of perspectives on a single topic, to assure that you had an opportunity to hear about divergent political perspectives. And those topics are identified each year by the student body. So anything that you see in All Angles is a topic and a discussion that Pitt students have said is important to them. And that includes students from our regional campuses, who, by the way, are joining us today live streaming from our regionals. So welcome to you as well. The All Angles program is an opportunity for you to witness, observe, and learn how people can have a discussion with those whom they disagree. Being able to solve problems with people that you disagree with is an essential workforce skill. It is also an essential ingredient to governance and sustaining a democratic society. Too frequently, we find ourselves getting lost in the noise of political acrimony, and too often that noise is intentional. It comes from all directions, and it can activate our flight-fight response, causing us to shut down, stop learning, tune out, or get louder in a way that's counterproductive. All Angles intends to offer you access to a thoughtful discourse, multiple ways of thinking about an issue. It's spirited, focused, and the discussion is on very tough issues. Because the discussions can be on tough issues, we do want to make sure you all know that the Pitt Counseling Services is on site in case anyone needs to take a breather. Just let our folks know at the registration table. So we're proud to have addressed a number of topics since we launched the program. We've addressed climate change in a session called Global Energy Demand in Our Environment, U.S. relations with China, election integrity, affirmative action, economic opportunity, and the world order and human rights. Our moderators are from Pitt. They're subject experts, and our speakers hail from some of this country's most influential institutions. We've had speakers from the American Enterprise Institute, NYU's Brennan Center for Social Justice, the Heritage Foundation, University of Texas, Bureau of Geology, Princeton, UCLA, George Mason, Pitt, CMU, and Bridge USA. And we've hosted a number of advisors from former presidential administrations. So today's tough topic is, can we just disagree? Can we just disagree? I think it's good timing, actually, because you're going to head home for Thanksgiving in a couple weeks. And I think that we've all heard the story of the disruptive Thanksgiving dinner. And, so instead of, if this happens to you, instead of leaving the table or throwing your mashed potatoes, think about today's critical question. How can I engage with someone who disagrees with me while staying true to my beliefs and leaving myself open to learning a different perspective? Second, when I take this approach, can I sustain relationships and leave the door open for further learning for myself and for my friend, relative, or colleague? Now, every all-angle session, I go over the objectives. Essentially, we want you to hear new perspectives, think about them, use your critical thinking skills, observe and reflect on communication styles or techniques that are being used with the speaker and the moderators, and then connect with fellow students here who share your concerns, and they come from different backgrounds, campuses, and field of studies. Guiding principles. These are important. They're at your table. That's how important they are. Number one, All Angles is founded on the notion that we respect and value all people. Two, consistent with the mission of higher education, we aim to, the series aims to examine topics intellectually from multiple and divergent perspectives. We know we can't always separate our emotions from intellectualizing something. So what we ask is that we accept that the dialogue can be enthusiastic, but it also needs to be respectful and productive. That's really important when you guys get to Q&A. Evidence-based and data-driven discussions are required of our speakers. And that we also respect that values, culture, and faith are foundational aspects of our American democratic society and are touch points on our political spectrum. So it's with great pleasure today that I introduce our co-sponsor and my colleague, Dean Carissa Slaughterbeck. She's the Dean of the School for Public and International Affairs, and since she became Dean, Dr. Slaughterbeck has led major efforts related to curriculum and student experiences. She served as the co-chair for the Year of Discourse and Dialogue for 2 years, 2023 to 2025. And her scholarship is focused on public engagement and decision-making in environmental and land use policy. She was inducted as a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners in 2018 and as a member of the National Academy for Public Administration in 2024. Please join me in welcoming Carissa Slaughterbeck.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for a really wonderful kickoff. And really, we are absolutely so fortunate to have the Institute of Politics and the All Angles series on our campus. As I think about the important work that needs to be happening at the University of Pittsburgh and on campuses like ours, it is just this kind of programming and engagement that is so essential, and absolutely amazing to see this room full of students who are interested in these topics, interested in building their own capacity, learning together, and just figuring out ways that we can come together even more effectively. And we are especially excited today to welcome David Greene back to the University of Pittsburgh. I'll introduce him a little bit more in a moment, but he's here to help us think about how we can be even better at disagreeing. You might be thinking, well, why do we need to disagree? It's really hard. It makes me stressed. I might be sweating more. I might be uncomfortable. And really, on the surface, it might feel like, well, isn't disagreeing just about deepening and making visible all of the divisions that we already know are here? Yes, it can do all of those things. But as we really think about why we are here, why we're here as students and staff and faculty and as universities overall, this is how we do our work. It takes this kind of coming together, this kind of engagement, and especially this kind of disagreement for us to do our work really well. This is how we create new knowledge. It's how we support learning. It supports our ability to bring different perspectives to the table, and this is absolutely essential to what we do. And I know that I would much rather talk to someone that I disagree with. It's more comfortable, it's fun, it's lower stress, but I know for sure that I am missing something if I am not engaging with and trying to understand people who bring different experiences and different perspectives to whatever the issue might be that I'm working on. I'm missing chances to learn from them. I'm missing a chance to reflect on why I think certain things and how did I actually arrive at this? I'm not quite sure. To find new ways to solve problems and to recognize that I might actually have more in common with those folks that I think I disagree with than maybe I actually do. We're hoping you get a little bit of that today. This work, as Samantha shared, that we've been doing at the University of Pittsburgh started in 2023 with the Year of Discourse and Dialogue. Pitt designates a theme every year for the last decade or so, and this was such an important theme, we continued it for a bonus year and did it for 2 years. And even continuing into this academic year, lots of great work that is going on. We've been developing programming as part of this for students, for staff, for faculty, to help us all be a little bit better at disagreeing, and especially just plain actually connecting with each other, looking at ways that we can find common ground, that we can discuss and debate multiple perspectives, keep conversations open, support debate on important issues in our classroom, live into what it actually means to say we believe in freedom of expression on our campuses, and really just helping all of us to be a little bit better at navigating this messy world. I think we can all agree it's messy in some ways, however you want to characterize it, and building skills that you can use as you continue your education here at Pitt, and also skills that you need as you move into your future jobs in whatever field. I think pick any field represented here. Think about the value of being able to connect with others, learn from others, be in disagreement with others when needed in order to move important work forward. We all have a lot to learn about how to do this well and how to support meaningful conversations that surface and especially navigate the different perspectives that each of us brings to the table. And as I said, we're really fortunate to hear today from an expert for whom conversation, building connections, and even facilitating disagreement is really central to his work. David Greene is an award-winning journalist, a New York Times bestselling author, who hosted NPR's Morning Edition for nearly a decade. David stepped away from Morning Edition in 2021 and co-founded a new company, Fearless Media, which collaborates with KCRW, NPR's flagship station in LA, in producing the Left, Right, and Center podcast, which is described as a civilized, yet provocative, confrontation over politics, policy, and pop culture. He reported from Ukraine during the start of the escalation of the war with Russia during 2022. He reported from Libya during the Arab Spring, covered the George W. Bush presidency, and reported on Hillary Clinton's campaign from start to finish. He's also a best-selling author, sharing insights on Russian life under Putin in his Midnight in Siberia book, which was based on 2 amazing, if you get a chance to read this book, trips on the Trans-Siberian Railway. I could go on, but definitely refer you to the program, which has David's inspiring and really extensive bio and gives you really a sense of what he's bringing to this conversation. And importantly, David has some Pittsburgh cred, which is always important when you're in Pittsburgh. He grew up here. He is a graduate of Pitt's Falk Laboratory School. He serves on Pitt's Global Advisory Council and has been working over more than a year with the University Center for International Studies on a number of initiatives. He was also here in April as part of our discourse and dialogue work in an event that was focused on how loneliness actually intersects with the challenges that we face in building community. And as David prepares to join me on stage for a conversation, we're just going to play a brief clip of a new documentary film that he has been collaborating on called Louder Than Guns. It examines issues and perspectives around gun violence and gun rights and demonstrates how through civil discourse, it can be possible to find common ground. It'll give you a sense of how he approaches his work and what you might expect from today's session. I hope you'll join me in welcoming David to the stage, and also we'll take a look at the clip. Thank you, David. Great. Thank you for sharing this work. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but just wanted to be able to demonstrate for this group as we kick off, what does this work look like? How does it feel? How do you think about, as someone like you who does this amazing work, how do you facilitate these kinds of conversations, and especially related to really fraught issues like is addressed here? But let's step back for a moment, if that's okay. And I think, we can probably all agree that we're in a moment. And there are lots of ways to describe that moment. When I say we're in a moment, you can probably all come up with a few words that express how you perceive this moment. You might say there's heightened scrutiny related to speech on campuses. You might say there are deep divisions related to politics in America. You might say that there are challenges in being able to come together across difference. How do you think about this moment? And also sort of how was that playing out in this film that you had? But what's your sense of where we're at?
I mean, I think we're getting to Thanksgiving, right? How many of you in this room are a little nervous about the conversation at the Thanksgiving table with family and what might come up? Yeah, I mean, it's sad that there are a lot of people in here who have that worry. Like that's the moment that we're in, that you feel like you can't sit at a table with people you know, people in your community, people in your family, and talk about anything that you want to talk about. You actually have to think about how I'm going to navigate it. Is this going to come up? If it does, am I going to get angry at my mom? Is my sibling going to dive in her defense? And then I'm not going to want to sit there anymore. And that night in Nashville when we filmed that scene you just saw, we spent maybe 2.5 hours at a table in a restaurant, and there's every imaginable perspective around that table. There were owners of multiple AR-15s. There were people who have never touched a firearm in their life. There was a woman at the end of the table whose son was murdered at a Waffle House. And as soon as that happened, when she was grieving, there were gun owners in Nashville who started attacking her and saying, "I'm not going to let you take my guns away." And she just had to cry out and say, I'm not coming to take your guns. I'm a grieving mom. I know that all gun owners aren't bad people who want my son to die. Like it's just, those are the things that you have to overcome. And I think we're in a moment where the status quo is for things to either get inflamed or for us to engage in avoidance. And to fight the status quo is to actually find ways very deliberately and very specifically to stay at the table. That's the moment that feels different to me. Like it takes enormous thought and effort to stay in conversation where we once were a culture where conversation was natural.
I love that. Thank you for sort of setting the table. I wonder if we can drill down to university campuses like Pitt. You've spent a little bit of time here with us over the last year or so. You've also been on a lot of other university campuses. As you think about this moment and what you're seeing playing out, what people are assuming is happening here, maybe what you've observed happening here as you think about conversations among students.
I mean, I think the Vivek Murthy, who was Surgeon General until a little more than a year ago, I guess less than a year ago, he and I, by happenstance, were college classmates. And he has spoken recently, and this really resonated with me, that dining halls on college campuses feel totally different to him than when he and I were in school, 2 decades ago. And you all would know this much more than me, so it feels weird to be telling you what college, dining halls feel like now. But they're much quieter. At least that was his impression as he's gone campus. People on their phones, sort of in your own worlds, and it didn't used to be that way. We didn't have iPhones when I was in college. I'm making myself sound really old.
Me either.
Yeah, but it was, that was just this space for conversations that could go anywhere, and that felt like part of the vibrance and energy of a place like this. And I mean, the moment I sit down and spend time with any of you, like, I realize how much personality and passion and viewpoints that you have, and the idea of that being contained, because we're so invested in kind of relationships with phones and social media and pushed into our echo chambers. Like, it just feels like something's being robbed, because communities like this are where there should be vibrant, raw, hard conversations, where relationships should develop around, disagreement. And I want to do anything to bring that back, but the extent to which that's not happening makes me really sad.
Thank you for being here to help us do that. We're excited. You've said in the past, when we were chatting when you were here in April, that Pitt and Pittsburgh are uniquely positioned to find a path forward in this moment. Can you share just a little bit more about what you think is unique in this context and the potential that we have to meet this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my college experience was Harvard, and I'll just say it, like, it felt like, an ivory tower in the most, in the most glaring sense of that term. I loved it. I think it was a great experience. I got a great education. I have friendships from there. But when I was in Pittsburgh and at Pitt, when I was growing up, when I was at the folk school, when my dad was on the medical faculty here, when my mom was a grad student, I look back and it's like Pitt has both the academic rigor that can compete with anyone, but also it's just this relationship with community that makes it a place that just feels more natural to have the kinds of life conversations that need to happen, that need to get us back to our roots of meaningful dialogue. It just feels like we are closer to families, to neighborhoods, to a community, to history here. Pitt feels of Pittsburgh, of Western Pennsylvania, and it's in communities where you're reminded of shared priorities and shared goals and shared sense of mission. And so to me, it's, on top of all of that, just being in, a politically divided state. There are a lot of college campuses in this country right now where it's very hard to relate to the other. Here, I think there is no other because we're all here. And I assume that you are having relationships with people who you might disagree with politically in your lives much more than is happening in a lot of other academic settings. But you're also at a place that is thinking more deeply, academically, philosophically about how we can be better as a society. And so it's, Pitt just has a special sauce that I think very few places have.
That's good. We need that inspiration, especially as we think about how it is that we get to disagreement. I'm wondering if you can talk about, and you have this incredible career, probably thousands of conversations that you've had, including probably some with people that you would disagree with. Can you talk a little bit about why disagreeing feels so difficult, and especially when we're interacting in person? Often it can be easier to sort of have a Twitter fight with someone or post nasty comments on our media page or Instagram. Why is it so hard?
I mean, there are a lot of reasons, I think. I mean, one is the relationship with social media right now, and algorithms are not just driving us into our echo chambers, but making it feel like anyone who doesn't agree with us is literally our enemy. And it just forces us into that space. So and I totally fall into this trap without a doubt. I mean, I'll have conversations with my wife, and she'll be like, what have you been looking at? Like on Instagram, like what is wrong with you right now? But it really gets you into this space where you start making assumptions about people when you learn one thing about them. And then suddenly you're just forcing this narrative on someone else and passing judgment on them without showing any space to learn about, their values or who they are. So I think social media is a big part of it, and algorithms and cable news. And I mean, the whole media environment is just driving us into places that make it very unnatural to want to have dialogue. I also think we're caving into this, like, how dare you culture. And that's one thing I think about a lot. It's like, if something you hear triggers you or feels uncomfortable, I think we're in this place where jumping to how dare you feels like the first thing that you want to do. And that's part of our culture right now. And sometimes you have to do that. I'm not saying there's not a time when you feel threatened, disrespected. No doubt. Sometimes you need to draw a boundary and just say, I'm not comfortable here. And I think that can be the moment in a conversation that can actually open doors and not close them, because you're being truly honest about, who you are in that moment. Like, what you're saying right now, I want you to know this really makes me uncomfortable and I can't continue the conversation. But let me take a beat, and I want to think about what you've said, and maybe we can have coffee tomorrow. Like, that is okay. No one is making you stay here to be uncomfortable and be triggered. But I think when that moment comes to you, and it's like, my first reaction is, how dare you? Pause and just for a second be like, do I need to be thinking that right now? Do I need to be saying that right now? Or is there a space for me to wonder, what's in this other person's heart that led them to say this thing? And so there may be a follow-up question or two or seven that could lead to learning something. You don't have to go right to how dare you? And I think the how dare you culture is taking us to a very dark place. I'm not saying it's never the right place to go, but just give it a beat and think about whether there might be some other question to ask yourself.
How do you keep the conversation open, even if it doesn't work for you to continue in that moment? That's great.
And I've had this myself. I mean,
I was going to ask about an example of, how, when you were in this moment, sort of feeling these feelings of like, I want to shut it down. I want to walk away. I want to fight. What's an example? I'd love to hear.
My wife and I were on our way to a soccer game, probably like a few months after October 7th. And, my wife, I can't remember how it came up, but she said, this genocide is horrific. And I, being the journalist, was like, honey, you should really be careful with that word, because that's a very specific word, like in international law, in the United Nations. Like, and she was like, and she was about to go to, how dare you? Like, and she sort of did. And she was like, how are you not seeing what is happening? How would you see this as anything but a genocide? And I was like, well, I kind of come at this from a place of, I want, it's horrific what I'm watching in Gaza right now. But I also, I choose my words very carefully. And I think that we're better if we're not throwing words around. That conversation, like, we stopped talking for a few minutes. And I kind of had to draw back in and apologize. But, even between two people who, I feel like my wife and I can solve any problem together, but it was getting to how dare you zone.
Yeah, these are skills that we need, practices that we need that are very personal in the personal family relationships that we have, but also in the professional work that you do. I'd love to pivot to part of your professional work, which is left, right, and center. I don't know if there are folks in the audience who listen to this really, really great podcast. I shared just a bit of background on it. What you do in that podcast is create conversations between people who have different perspectives on important policy issues, important political issues. as you think about crafting those moments and sort of curating groups of people, curating, supporting conversations, how do you think about how to foster effective disagreement and sort of surface different perspectives? How do you facilitate?
I mean, I want to believe that our show can cover anything. And that's the beauty of it. And we can stay there together in good faith and in respectful dialogue. And I hope that an hour a week, we're modeling that for everyone who's listening. And we've covered a lot of hard stuff. And we've had conversations when we've gotten off the air where there have been apologies. Israel Gaza was one of them. That was some of the most tense episodes that we ever did. And Mo and Sarah, Mo Alethi is my regular left. He ran communications for the DNC. Sarah Isger's on my right. She ran communications for the Department of Justice under President Trump. And, they're friends. We've all become friends, but, it gets really, really tough. There was one time where I was talking about this with some of the students we're going to hear from in a couple of minutes, where we had to tell a guest that we never want him back again because, he was, personally attacking the person on the other side. That's where it's not allowed. But I think the beauty is we really feel like we can cover anything. After this, these elections last week, it was, you had the Speaker of the House saying that these elections meant nothing. They were all in blue cities and states. You had people on the left who were celebrating like this was literally the best political moment in the last century. There are questions about what Mamdani represents on the left, whether his views are too extreme or not. We could talk about all of that. We could talk about the likelihood that President Trump and Republicans are probably going to use Mamdani's face, to try to make his face the face of the left, because that would be so politically beneficial, all this stuff. And it's hard, but we could do it. And the fact that we're around the table and I think that the feeling that I like to really create on the show is that we're figuring stuff out together. And it's that sense of shared mission, even though we come from completely different places, that I hope gives a sense of hope to people listening and models something important.
Yeah, I think the modeling piece is really important. So, I mean, as we think about building capacity of any one of us who is in this room, there's the capacity that we bring as a participant, but then there are also the ways that we foster communication that we might be participating in or communication among others. So think about those roles that you have, the ways that you maybe in a group setting help to facilitate and draw out and keep conversations open in interesting ways. I'm going to ask just one more question, and then we get to see you in action in conversation with some of our students. But this is a group of students who are interested and motivated by politics, and they have really strong feelings about a wide range of policy issues. What are a few pieces of advice that you would offer to students in this room as they think about spaces where they might be disagreeing with others, but are feeling maybe constrained into entering a conversation with someone that they disagree with?
I think one of the important things is to always go back to the relationship. Like a conversation is a relationship. You're there for a reason. And it can be incredibly connective to be vulnerable and to try and make space for vulnerability. It's like if you are uncomfortable, like say that you're uncomfortable. If someone seems uncomfortable, ask them how they're feeling and what they're bringing to the table. If they say something that kind of shocks you or you want to understand, maybe instead of jumping on them and trying to talk them out of this thing that bothered you, be curious about where that position comes from and why they're so ingrained in that place. You might learn something about them. You might learn something about their position. You might learn something about your own life. Like every conversation, you said it is an opportunity to learn and build connectivity. And I think the other thing that I especially learned from this film, even when you feel like you are on completely different sides of some issue or some question with someone else, there may very well be a commonality that you're missing. And that's one of the things that I have learned from spending hours and hours with people talking about firearms. Like so many people who were part of the conversations we were putting this film together are just afraid. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for their kids. And oftentimes people will want to own a firearm to protect them and to protect their families. And oftentimes people will hate guns because they are afraid for themselves and their safety and for their families. Like, what if we all came around to the table and said, like, we are parents, or we have siblings, or we are students on a campus and are afraid for our lives, and like we share that fear. And now let's talk about why we've gone into two different places to address that same fear. But it's like suddenly that shared emotion becomes such a connection in the relationship, and it paves the way to actually talk about the hard stuff. And looking for that connection, looking for that commonality. It's not going to be there every time, but being open-minded to that can mean so much, I think, and pave the way for conversations that are just not happening enough right now.
We definitely need more. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
That's just a quick kickoff and just sort of scratches the surface on some ideas. I appreciate your sharing some personal examples and professional examples. And again, we're excited to see you in action. I'm going to turn it back to Samantha to talk about what we're going to do next. Really, thank you. Thank you for modeling this. Thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be here. No, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have our student panel. So I'm going to introduce our students and ask you to, when you come up, pull your chair up. Hey, these are the pictures I found online. So that's a lesson to everyone. If you want a headshot, make sure it's the one that is accessible online. Okay, student panelists, we are so privileged to have them here today. They are campus leaders in political groups or groups that are politically engaged in some way. So Cole Belling, you want to come up to the stage? Cole is the president of Bridge Pitt. He's a senior, a chancellor scholar, and is a political science and philosophy major. Julia Cassidy is a junior, president of Pitt College Republicans, political science and economics major. Michaela Painter is a senior. She's a political science major with a minor in Italian and certificates in communications and homeland security and national preparedness. And she is the VP of political science of the Political Science Student Association. Thanks, Dean. And Austin Wise. Austin is a senior. He's a poli-sci major, and he is president of the Pitt College Democrats. Help me welcome them.
Thank you all for being brave and coming up here and doing this. We were chatting before everyone else came into the room, and I think listening to some of you talk about how you've been treated in recent times just for being involved in politics has been hard, and it kind of broke my heart to hear about that. But I would love you to, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about what it's been like. Julie, you were talking about tabling for the college Republicans, and just that mere act makes you vulnerable, which is really tough to hear.
Is it? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we were talking over there, and I know this isn't a sentiment just shared by me. I know it's also been a problem for the college Democrats as well. But obviously, being in a university setting as a conservative student, it's not always the easiest. position to be in, because I know that on a campus like Pitt, it's harder to find people who are maybe aligned with my views. However, that I've always kind of been the person that is outspoken on what I believe, and so I got involved with the College Republicans and became the president, and we table once a week. And I'm at that table every week. I've been there for about the past year and a half now, and the experiences that we've had at our table, especially this year in particular, and especially after what happened with Charlie Kirk, have been disturbing. I think it speaks to a problem that we're having on college campuses across the country, but obviously my experience is the one here, where we're no longer able to have these conversations. I mean, that's kind of the theme of this entire discussion, but the problem is that people see, my partisan affiliation and assume automatically that my existence and our club's existence is a threat to their existence, and that automatically removes the ability to have a conversation. And so that's kind of been unfortunate to see, which is why I'm happy that the university is putting on an event like this, because I think we need to get back to a place where we're able to openly share ideas and kind of grow our ideologies together. That's what we're here on campus to do. But just to speak, particularly to some incidents that we've had students come up to us and just say, you have no right to exist here. Your table is threatening to my existence. I had a student walk by me and look me in the eyes, making a gun hand motion on his neck as he walked by, which was scary. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's pretty intimidating to feel that you're not welcome on a college campus simply because of your political beliefs that you're not even able to get to a point of talking about yet. So.
And Austin, you've literally experienced the same thing, tabling for college Democrats. So what has that experience been like?
Yeah, so we've had some experiences where things either got out of hand, yelling, things like that at us, knocking things off our tables, and even worse than that. And I think in today's environment, I mean, we're all on TikTok and on all types of social media platforms where the algorithm is designed to push the fringe ideas into our feeds. And I think on a college campus, you really see, like, whenever you're working in politics or getting involved with clubs like ours, you really see what that means for our generation. And I'll echo a lot of what Julia said. It is scary. I mean, you get death threats, you get people coming up and yelling at you in your face. I know that it's been, particularly after Charlie Kirk's death, has been particularly loud on campus.
What were people yelling at you, particularly after Charlie Kirk was murdered?
Things like, you said that Charlie Kirk deserved to die, whenever we said he did not deserve to die, even though we don't agree with a lot of the things he stood for. He's still a human being. So that was the main thing. And then things like baby killer and stuff like that.
And can we dissect what led to that a little bit? I mean, Julia, were you hearing from people on campus or your community that anyone wanted Charlie Kirk to die, that might have led people to scream it in Austin's face at their table?
So just to be clear, we have a very good and working relationship with the College Democrats. So it was no students affiliated with their organization whatsoever. However, when it did happen, I'm sure a lot of the students in this room are familiar with the Yik Yak app. And if you took a look at Yik Yak during that day, all you would see when you scrolled are people talking about how happy they were that this has happened. I mean, I have countless of screenshots on my phone of people saying, like, the quote from Wicked, "No one mourns the wicked," comparing him to Hitler, celebrating this, saying things like they're happy that his kids were in the audience to watch this, like really, really horrible things. And we actually met with the administration to kind of talk about that in the immediate aftermath and what that meant for us and our safety. And we also had students who had personal interactions. We had a student who had a whiteboard on her dorm room, like outside her door, and she wrote on it, "Pray for Charlie Kirk." And a student came up and erased that and wrote some really despicable things, using vulgar language that I wouldn't repeat in front of this audience. So we have encountered it, and it has been on social media. However, it's just to be clear again, it's nothing affiliated with the College Democrats, and I don't think it's right to assume that every person who didn't agree with Charlie Kirk would have that response. I don't think that most people do, but I do think it is still very concerning that there were a number of people who did express this sentiment of celebration.
Michaela Cole, you kind of come to this conversation without the sort of partisan identity, but an interest in politics being productive and not being dirty and mean and threatening. But you both said, we were sitting a little while ago, that the hardest issue that came up on this campus recently when it comes to politics was Charlie Kirk. Like, as you listen to, as we dissect where this anger and hate and accusations developed, like what could this community have done better to stop things from taking that turn?
I hope this is on. Okay. I think that, political violence and saying that that's wrong should not be a partisan issue. PSSA, or the Political Science Student Association, is a nonpartisan group on campus. And so, everyone can agree that that's wrong. I think it's really hard when a big event like this happens and not everyone is politically involved, and this hit mainstream and this hit people who are not involved. And we live in a world right now where everything becomes so heated and you make a snap judgment. And I think it's really hard because you can't tell people how to feel. There were people who agreed with Charlie Kirk and his messages and were so shaken up by what happened. And it's terrible that we all had to see this. I mean, I personally couldn't even go on TikTok because it's like, I don't want to see that video. And the fact that it was shared so much, and the fact that his children will have to watch that one day and had to live, like, that's terrible. And I think that, people lose touch of humanity, and that's disgusting, and that's not a partisan thing. But it's also hard to tell people that they're not allowed to, be relieved. That's a weird word to say it, but, they feel like Charlie Kirk attacked their beliefs and didn't think that they should be able to be who they truly are. And you can't tell those people that they're wrong for having some sort of feeling about it. And I feel like everything got so heated and people are saying really despicable things on both sides either way. And kind of like you said, I think that people have to be able to take a step back. You have to realize the weight of your words, and having a broader conversation about how wrong political violence is really what that moment should have become. And instead it turned into just such terrible hate speech and things. And I just think on campus that has no place. And I know that the administration feels the same way and all of those things.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that. I think as we're all kind of seeing here today, engaging in political dialogue requires a distinct kind of human vulnerability, right? We have to have faith in the people that we're engaging with, that they won't disrespect us and that they will respect our humanity as people who are engaging in that conversation and our dignity. And I think that what became so difficult about the Charlie Kirk discussion was that we asked people to join a conversation where they were reckoning with the mortality of a person. And that was really difficult for us to have that conversation on humanitarian grounds where everyone felt like everyone's opinions were being respected.
I think the humanitarian grounds is such an accurate way to put it, because I think somehow Charlie Kirk's killing, it took everyone to the "how dare you" place, which I think takes you away from humanitarian grounds, because anything you said could trigger someone else. It's like if you said after a father was killed, like, what, I hated his views, then it's like, how dare you disparage someone who was just killed? And in the opposite direction, if you mourned his death, suddenly the assumption was that you are validating everything that he said and believed in, and that you don't care about someone else. What tools do you think we should all be using? Like, if we use this as a real case study, like a conversation that's happening maybe at one of your tables, or maybe as you're having dinner or, talking to roommates or classmates? Like what's the thing that you could do to diffuse or bring us back to the humanitarian grounds that might teach us all something?
I think that, like you said, we want to have humanitarian conversations, but especially when you see such an intimate link between political dialogue and death, it becomes really, really dark and really difficult. So we just have to try and keep moving on and recenter. Like, look, we are all still people in this room right now who have the power to keep having those conversations. And we should be grateful that we can continue engaging in political dialogue like we are right now. So I think that it always helps before our bridge discussions, we kind of just get to know each other a little bit as people, not as political combatants.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a separation of ideological beliefs and the human dignity of a person. I think a lot of times in today's day and age, someone might hold a particular viewpoint or belief, and people automatically assume that it's an attack on another person's character. And that, again, is a step away from that recognition of everyone's human dignity. And so I think we need to come back to a place where before you enter a conversation, you recognize that the person standing in front of you, most of the time, you're both trying to reach a similar place or trying to come to a similar solution or understanding. You're just going about different ways of doing that. And so I think the reaction in the aftermath of what happened to Charlie Kirk does stand as a case study. Like you said, I think something that we talked about at the table earlier is that some of the responses that we saw, that's not kind of a response that you would have overnight. Like the immediate response to celebrate something like this, I think that's something that's kind of been bubbling under the surface, and it's a result of that lack of open and honest conversation. A lot of times if a difficult conversation or difficult topic arises, we automatically shut down. Like you said, it automatically jumps to that how dare you moment. But I don't think people really understood that or saw that as reality until what happened with Charlie Kirk. And so I think that there needs to be a basic understanding and respect for each other's dignity. And I also think that if that isn't in existence, then sometimes I don't know if there's a conversation that can be had there if there isn't that respect.
Austin, can you personally empathize with people who were so offended by Charlie Kirk's beliefs that they found it hard to mourn his loss?
I think that expecting folks to have empathy not only like puts them in a corner where it's like you're forcing me to have this empathy for somebody that they didn't know and that they didn't agree with. I don't think that is necessary in the same way that I don't think that we should be lecturing people on what their beliefs should be. So yes, a little bit. But I think the calls like cheering it on and celebrating his death was not okay. But it just comes down to like no one should be forced into a corner on how they should feel about any issue, especially in the United States of America.
Yeah, God, you're describing like such a hard balance because it does become almost like a test. Like if I'm going to bring up Charlie Kirk's death right now, and if you do anything other than say it is horrible that he was killed, like even if you sit there in silence because you're struggling with this, you've become an evil person.
Yeah, and I mean in the same way that if you were to mourn his death, you're evil. Or so it went both ways. And I think, again, that comes from the amplification of the fringe on both sides on social media. And a lot of times it's not even like our party actors per se, just people that are adjacent left or adjacent right. They might not even identify as a Democrat or Republican, but they're on that more fringe side. So that gets pushed, shoved down people's throats on social media. And then that becomes, I immediately assume that because of my social media feed that Julia would co-sign onto anything that Charlie Kirk believed. And she would assume that I was against Charlie Kirk, that I wanted him to die. And that narrative just isn't the truth. I mean, it's not, and we can't let the fringe decide what the political conversations are and what our generation is thinking is.
I also just want to add, I have a lot of friends who are not political, and when I talk about being a political science major, it's almost like taboo. Like people are like, oh, it's like embarrassing to almost say in a way. And I think it's because this like fringe, this polarization in America, it just makes politics feel like something that people don't want to be involved in. They see it as debate and conflict and tension, and then they're not involved, which is just so harmful to not be engaged in what is going on. And I feel like the people in this room, you know, you're here because you care about politics. And so maybe you can resonate with this when you try to have discussions with other people. But I feel like it's so important to understand that you are seeing such extremes of both sides on social media, and that there are people who want to have open and honest discussions, and that these discussions don't have to be about changing each other's minds or convincing someone to believe what you believe. It can be about understanding another person's perspective and being open to their ideas. And you don't have to agree, you don't have to co-sign those thoughts, but you just have to be willing to hear it out and better understand it, and it will make you a more rounded person. And I feel like it's such a shame that politics have become this, and we face that in classes when you identify as a D or an R, and you also face this in the world when you just try to talk about what's going on, and people are so quick to not have those discussions.
Can I ask that leads me to a sensitive question that I wanted to ask. I wanted to note the fact that this is a very homogeneous group that we have up here, the five of us. And I wonder if there's any lesson there about the world of politics and something that we could be doing better, that the fact that this is, you know, that some of the people who are involved in having political discussions, that it is so homogeneous up here. And if somehow we're doing something that's not, you know, welcoming in diverse perspectives and points of view into politics in general, and also, you know, here at Pitt.
I think the first thing is we have to call on our leaders to set a great example for the rest of our country. Today, we have leaders who will encourage this type of polarization and encourage political violence, or just ignore it whenever it happens to the other side. I know that Governor Shapiro had an attack on his life, and that kind of went ignored by a lot of folks. There was other attacks up in the state legislature in either Minnesota or Michigan, and that sort of went ignored or got cheered on or joked about, and so it set a tone for whenever it happened to Charlie Kirk. People were, you know, I think it's important that our leaders are setting that example for us to have these hard conversations and have open dialogue while still respecting each other. And when our leaders can't even respect each other, how are we supposed to do that?
Right. And I agree with that. But I also would add, likewise, I think that something that permeates a lot of discussions about political polarization is like, it wasn't always this way 20 years ago. It wasn't always like this. And that may be true, but at the same time, there are communities who have never had a seat at the political table or had the option to engage in dialogue that wasn't laced with aggression or violence. So I think that part of it is not just how can we return to dialogue of 20 years ago, but how can we reflect on dialogue and continue improving it? And how can we get to a better place than we've ever been? And I think that that's really the challenge that we face, not getting back to where we were.
I guess I want to press a little more like on the homogeneous part of this group. Is it one of the things that I've struggled with, like particularly on our show, you know, we'll have a conversation about race and policing, and no one on my show will have actually experienced racism. You know, we'll have a conversation about transgender rights, and I will get very justified criticism for like, you're not hearing from someone who is trans, so how are you having this conversation about communities that don't represent a life experience that is here? And I guess I wonder, what is that a problem with politics sometimes, that it's almost like some conversations about issues are taking place that we're not actually hearing the perspectives of people who are being affected by some of the questions that we're trying to answer, if that makes sense.
I don't know if there we go. Okay. I think it's a tough question to ask. I think a lot of it comes from a place of needing, again, an understanding of everyone's human. Everyone comes from a different perspective, a different experience. And so if we automatically, sometimes I think we just assume that everybody has that understanding. And whether or not you agree with the person or not, if you assume that they have that understanding and you disagree with their beliefs, then you kind of assume that they have bypassed that. And I think that's a problem that needs to be addressed. I think there's also kind of a problem now in our society, and I see it on a university level and on a national level, where there's trouble calling out things as it is. Like, I think it's after we saw, after an act of political violence, it's always, well, political violence is wrong, and that's great, and that's obviously, all of us sitting up here agree with that sentiment, but I think when we see it happening, we need to call out specifically what just happened, how did this affect one group, and how did the other group get affected. We need to start talking about that more, because when we kind of just gloss over things in a neat way of, well, all of this is wrong, we know it's wrong, we're going to move on. But we keep seeing it happen. You just brought up 2 instances of political violence. There was an instance of political violence on this campus 3 years back. Like, it's everywhere. It's all around us, and I think it's not enough anymore. Just to relate it to the conversation we were just having, I don't think it's enough anymore to simply say, well, all political violence is wrong, because we know that, but it's not having the effect of, well, how do we stop it? I think we need to call out specifically when it's happening. Well, why is it happening? Where did this person's beliefs come from? What led them to act on this? I think that needs to be talked about more, because obviously it's tough and it's difficult, and it's going to get into the weeds a little bit, but that's the only way that I believe that we can actually start to promote a change and promote a better understanding of each other.
I think the word that comes to mind when I listen to you is humility. And I think the more humility there is in politics, the better. And it goes back to something you said too, Austin, we shouldn't be lecturing people about how they should feel. And I think, in life in general, but also particularly in politics, when we're trying to solve problems and trying to work like hell to have people not go to a dark place, but to come up with solutions together. It's like remembering that there's a real risk of not having the life experience that actually is going to be impacted by all the things that we're talking about. And, if we're not represented, it's like remembering to be curious and to have humility and to feel like we don't know what someone else's experience is, but be curious so we can learn and then solve problems in that way. I guess, Julie, I was asking you all sort of what other hard issues were out there. I want to get to political redistricting, Austin. That was the one that you brought up. But you brought up transgender rights as something that you've had debates about on campus. And why did that come to mind? And what's been hard when it comes to that issue?
Yeah, so I think the reason it came up when we were talking about it was you asked what issues are the most hard to talk about, frankly. And to me, that's one of them, because from my perspective, a lot of the things that people say when we are tabling is in response to some of the social issues. So people will come up to us and call me specifically, this has happened to me a number of times, call me transphobic or homophobic or whatever it may be, whatever word they want to use, without even knowing my name or knowing anything about me. And I think that with the issue of transgenderism in particular, it's so tough because, like you said, it automatically kind of jumps to that personhood, and you are against me and my existence. And I want to be very clear, my position on it has nothing to, it's all, like I said earlier, we're all trying to get to the same place of, we want individuals to experience the best possible outcome for their life. And from my perspective, the ideology of transgenderism, based off of the clinical data and a lot of recent studies in recent times, doesn't always support the idea that affirming transgenderism or affirming gender affirming care, things like that, that doesn't always result in being the most effective way for helping someone with mental health struggles. And so I think the issue of transgenderism comes from a perspective of it's a medical problem, it's a clinical problem, but it's so tough because it automatically jumps to that assumption of you're against my existence as a human being, when that couldn't be further from the truth. But my understanding of the issue is I want these individuals to experience the best life they possibly can, and I have compassion for everybody who's going through something like that, because obviously I've never been in that position, but I assume it cannot be easy. And so I think there needs to be that understanding of, again, we're all human. We're all coming from this issue from a perspective of how do we make this better? How do we make our society better? And we can't forget that anymore. And the conversation has to happen, because right now it's not happening. People will walk up and say, you're transphobic. And like that, if you don't even know my name, if you even haven't even had a conversation with me, then that's not a fair thing to say.
How does that resonate with the rest of you?
I can understand where you're coming from. Obviously, being judged before you feel like they even know you as a person is incredibly difficult. I think it's hard. I feel like it kind of relates back to our previous conversation where you can't tell someone how to feel. If they feel as though, gender affirming care allows them to be their true self, and they feel as though that's, the best way they can be. I'm not a part of the trans community. I don't want to act as if I can speak for them. Again, I think representation is so important in these conversations. And I can see how your beliefs and even referring to it as a mental health issue could be really damaging to them and understanding their identity. And I think it's hard because it's like you don't want to be called these vulgar things. And they also don't want to feel as though their identity is being attacked on campus. And I can see where things like that would make them feel unwelcome. I do think it's such a tricky issue, but that doesn't mean these conversations shouldn't happen and they shouldn't exist. But I don't know, I'd just be careful with that.
How do we avoid the pitfall of someone feeling like their existence is being questioned and someone feeling like they're being labeled transphobic for saying something?
Well, I think regarding the transgender issue, look at the suicide rates. They're so high for transgender folks in our country. And whenever they feel like, they feel like the right wing is against their existence. That's how they feel. And rulings in the courts show that. Legislation shows that, even in our own PA State House, State Senate. And I think, by definition, some of the beliefs are transphobic. And I think folks need to be okay with, whenever you take a stance, own it. And if by definition your views are transphobic, you have to own that.
I think this issue has struck me in a similar way that I've experienced with the guns issue. Everything doesn't have to be binary. I think with firearms in the country, it's like after a school shooting, if you react and say the only answer is to ban all firearms, then everyone who owns a firearm in the country is like, you're attacking me. And if you say this was actually a mental health crisis and it had nothing to do with the firearm, then suddenly you don't care about the number of guns that are in it literally has to be one or the other. I interviewed Leah Thomas a couple months ago. She's the Penn swimmer who got stripped of her titles. And it was interesting talking to her because it's both an issue of who she is, and she talked about literally having to make a choice between being a swimmer or being the person who she is. But in addition, it's a question of science. And, she herself talked about that, there were specific things that happened to her body when she was on hormone replacement therapy. And she understood that there were really kind of messy policy questions about when, she should be able to swim, for the women's team at Penn, and at the NCAA, struggle with those questions. So it's like it's all of the above. It's like someone's existence and who they are. It's a question of science. There are a lot of science questions that you have to answer. And I think sometimes we fall into a place where we assume that something is binary. And if you suggest otherwise, then you are the enemy and you are denying my own opinion. And we just get into a really dark, dark place. Listen, you brought up redistricting. I wanted to give you just a chance to say why that's been a tough issue to think about and talk about.
I think that there's a lot of debate on whether or not the Democratic Party fighting back and passing Proposition 50 in California recently is a bad move for the future of our country, because it sets a tone of, well, if the Texas Republican Party is redistricting or gerrymandering, so should we. And we just get into this battle to where folks thinks that it could be particularly damaging to our country, especially in an electoral system that campaign finance is dominated by corporations and rich people. So just kind of further making elections even more unfair in our country. And it's tough being on the left to not resonate with the folks who are worried, but at the same time, it's like, well, if they're fighting us in that way, we must fight back in the same way. We must fight fire with fire. Is how a lot of people will see it. And so I think that conversation has been particularly hard to navigate, especially on the left recently, with folks like Nina Turner out of Ohio saying that it sets a bad precedent, and then it started a war this week. So just an example.
I had a hard conversation with my own wife voting in California. We were ready to fill out our ballots, and she hadn't been following the news that closely. And she was like, how are you voting on Prop 50? And I was like, I'm going to vote for it by holding my nose, because it feels like it's a race to the bottom. Like both parties are just trying to manipulate the political system to ensure that they have extra seats in Congress. And that feels like a really dangerous place to be going. Let me ask you each, what is one of the hardest conversations you've had recently with either a friend on campus, family member, that feels like it's still unresolved?
All right, I can go. I recently had a conversation with my grandfather. I bet a lot of these might start that way, about global warming. And totally unprompted, he sat me down and he goes, Cole, I want to tell you what I believe about global warming. I was like, all right, here we go. I can't wait for this. And he pulled out a bunch of science-y mumbo jumbo about the cycle of ice ages and warmer periods that I don't really align with. And I kind of stayed quiet and let him speak. And I felt like I maybe didn't do him justice by responding to him and engaging with him, and instead just choosing to kind of sit there petrified for what might happen if I responded and said, hey, I don't really agree with that. So I texted him afterwards. I looked up a study and I texted him and I said, hey, Papa, I just want to let you know, here's a study I found on global warming. Let me know what you think of it. And he got back to me and he basically said, like, hey, those scientists that did that study got paid off. My scientists are better. And I was like, all right, well, I see how it is. But we continue to have those conversations. And I think that something that's been really salient up here tonight is that in this day and age, information is increasingly transient. And now everyone has their own facts, their own studies, their own experts who say whatever they want them to say in the conversation. So what our dialogue, in my opinion, is moving towards and needs to become more centered around is that emotional human piece. And not always we can get there, but like I repeated earlier, that's something that we try to do with Bridge, and that's something that we really try to do with all conversations, even on the most difficult conversations, is how can we expand this table? How can we make this conversation safe? How can we let people testify as to what they believe and just feel heard as human beings. And that does a lot of the mending itself. We don't try to force conclusion, agreement, common ground.
Just feel heard is so important, because that is what I think so many people crave, especially now and are not getting.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment of just being heard. I think for me, I was kind of racing through my head trying to think of conversations, and to be just completely candid, I think that the fact of and the point of even getting to a conversation for me is like a success. In a lot of ways, the toughest thing for me is the fact that those conversations don't usually happen for me. And I feel like some of the toughest things can be being in a classroom where I know that I might disagree with the majority opinion in the room, and sometimes on a certain day I might feel inclined to raise my hand and be that person who disagrees, and other days I just don't have it in me, because it's a lot. It can be exhausting to have those conversations, and that's something that we need to recognize as well, is that obviously this isn't easy, then that's why we're here today. But I think the hardest thing for me is just the not being able to have conversations about certain things.
Yeah, kind of building off of that, I had a conversation with a friend right before election day, and I asked if he was going to vote, and he was like, "No, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to vote." And I was really struck by that, and I tried to press, and I was like, "Why aren't you going to vote?" And he was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. They don't do anything." All of these things, and we had this like larger discussion, and he's not very politically involved, and it's like, how do you sift through the weeds of things? And I always try to approach those conversations as being as educational as possible. I obviously have my own beliefs, but I feel strongly that it's not my job to press upon my beliefs to other people. I should just encourage them to make their own choice. And so I tried to encourage him to vote. He's registered to vote, and we had this larger discussion, and I kind of walked away from it. He was like, "I just don't want to. Like, I'm just not going to." And it upset me, and I couldn't help, but I finally just maybe snapped a little bit. I kind of got, I forget what your wording was, but the "how dare you" point. And I was like, do you see the privilege you have in not feeling like you need to vote? Like, you don't feel as though the election and the decisions that these courts are going to make is going to affect your life, and so you're not going to vote. And then it was like, whoa, big eyes. And I was like, oh, maybe I went too far. I don't know. I still think about it, actually. If I said too much, if I scared it off, and I became the girl at the dinner table who makes things awkward. But I couldn't help but feel like, how are you not going to vote? And I don't know. I haven't reached it. He didn't vote. I voted, but I don't know. That was kind of that. There's no resolution. It already happened. Try again for midterms, I think.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a hard one, because especially when, I mean, as someone who's like devotes so much of your energy to politics and like participation, it's like to see someone you care about not wanting to participate and kind of do the democratic duty, but trying not to be too judgmental, but having a reaction. Like that's a tough one.
I would say that the listening part is super important of this, that all of them have echoed. I've had similar conversations like those, but I'll just focus on listening. This summer, I had the privilege of working at the United Steelworkers International HQ in downtown Pittsburgh, where I got to work with an organizing team that talked to a lot of folks in our union who did not agree with any of us politically. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans in labor unions nowadays, unions who are usually dominated by Democratic leadership or align with Democratic interest. And so learning how to really hear them out, where you're from plays a big part into these conversations. How you were raised. Do you come from a religious background? And are you from a rural, suburban, urban area? That all plays into the equation, and just learning to really listen, hear them out, understand their why helps you relate your policy solutions or your political preferences to them, and really tell like, okay, maybe this person is a little bit misguided in who they're supporting because their interests align with ours, but they just see they just see it from the outside looking in. They see the party image. They're like, no, I would never vote Democrat. Meanwhile, all their policy preferences align with ours. And so that listening and being open to dialogue, being open to disagree on things like guns, but then on the economy, we can agree on 9 out of 10 things, for example. So I think just listening is important.
Do we have time for some questions?
Okay, we have 4 microphones in this room. So I'm going to ask you all to forfeit one more mic to one of my colleagues. Tasha's here. I'm just going every other person. And then to share. So we're going to open this up to Q&A. And one of the things about All Angles that I think is really important to note is that we in no way, shape, or form try to control the questions that you're going to ask. We don't have an intention to do that. But what we do is expect respect and a question. We know there's a lot of smart people in this room, and everyone wants to make a statement, but this is Q&A, okay? All right.
So I have a question. Any of you 4 can answer it.
You also have favorite teacher.
Hi, I'm UT. I'm an MBA student here at Pitt. Lovely campus. And also, so my question is, it's a bit multifaceted. So I'm wondering, what role do you think that our 2-party system plays in this sort of, I guess, division in our country? And do you think that there's any possible way for a third party to gain viability?
I think the dual party system plays a big role in the fact that billionaires buy our elections, billionaires own our media companies, whether it be social or legacy media, and in turn reinforce whichever party is pushing their negative or their narrative at the time as big tech. And that plays a big role. I mean, when like, for example, in 2020, billionaire interests supported Joe Biden. In 2024, billionaire interests supported Donald Trump. And so we've seen a lot of folks just like capitulate to the Trump administration because of that. And I think the further we get into these gerrymandering battles and the further we let our elections and our politicians be bought, the less of a chance the people have of advocating for a third party or a multi-party system to prevail. And some may argue that we already do have that because like we have the progressives and the centrists on the left wing. We have the traditional fiscal Mitt Romney conservatives on the right, and then we have the MAGA right. But I do think that a multi-party system, or at least a proportional representation system, would have a chance in the future if we take care of those things like our elections being bought and our media companies being bought by, billionaire interests and controlled by the few.
I just want to add on to that. Third party, I really hope so, but I couldn't really prognosticate there. I just want to add a little bit less concretely, but more psychologically, I also think that the 2-party system goes away towards enforcing that kind of binary mindset that David had mentioned earlier.
Hi, my name is Pooja Halder. My question was about social media. You guys spent a lot of time talking about the effects of social media on political polarization. For me, I personally don't have any social media, and so a lot of my friends are very active on social media, especially TikTok. And so I find it really hard to bridge the gap because they'll be like, well, it's your duty. Like, you need to be on social media. You need to be seeing those things. But for me, I personally just found it really unhealthy. So I got off social media years ago, and I sort of feel like I'm missing a lot of the polarization that's out there. And so I guess I want your thoughts on
are my friends doing it the correct way? Should I be more active? Or like, is it okay to just politically engage with the people you know, like in your day-to-day life, in your community? What are your thoughts on the best ways to bridge the divide there?
So, is it on? Okay, number one, good for you. Good for you. I wish that I was less on social media. I am really working hard to actively do that. Like, I just find myself like doom scrolling at night, and it's like, that's not productive at all. And so good for you. I think the main point is something I'm also working on is being an active consumer, paying attention to the things that I am watching and the way that I'm gathering my information, being conscious of the biases of, you know, what organizations I'm following, avoiding echo chambers like David was mentioning earlier. And I think social media does create such a grounds for all of those like terrible consumption habits. And so as I think the important part is that you're getting information, that you're staying involved and informed, and how you come across that information is just up to your discretion. If you feel like it's healthier for you to not be on social media, then you should do that as long as you're an informed citizen.
Yeah. Just to add on really quickly, I totally agree with everything you said, and once again emphasize good for you. I think social media is unfortunately one of just the givens of our time. It's not going to go away anytime soon. It's only growing in power. And I think that it has the power, especially TikTok in particular, to really force people into these echo chambers through the algorithms, or even just through the way that clips get edited, and the short nature of the app, of people just constantly scrolling and hearing one thing and taking away an entire idea. So I think that it's really beneficial to separate yourself from that, especially even obviously you're never going to tell somebody who's on social media, just cold stop, get off of it. That's never going to happen. But I think if you start by telling someone that shouldn't be your only source of news, then we might be able to get to a better place and a more productive place. But I would just encourage you to stick to that, because I think that's a very admirable way of living.
In ancient Greece, in the founding place of democracy, there were different types of public squares that existed for the exact reason that folks use Twitter now, and that's to debate the topics of the day. And I think the more that we let corporate interests and billionaires control the narrative on social media and push what they want us to see, it limits our ability to utilize social media as the public square in the modern era. And I mean, personally, I believe that social media should be treated the same way as a public utility. Everyone should have the right to go onto it. Everyone should have the right to give their opinion, whether or not folks agree with it or not. And like with the censorship that we saw on social media during the COVID years, and now that we're seeing during Trump too, it's really disheartening because social media could be utilized as that modern day public square, but it really just reinforces, again, the fringe and corporate and billionaire interest instead of ours.
Hello, I'm Richie. I'm an MBA student. I've heard most of you express the idea that you don't want to force your beliefs on others. But what is politics if not using the state apparatus to force beliefs on society? So I'm curious, what is your understanding of liberty, and how does government fit into that?
There we go. We're back. Okay. That's a great question. I think there is a separation between forcing beliefs on somebody and expressing your beliefs in a way of bringing people towards them. I think there's a distinction between, oh, did you realize that this might have been happening that you might not have picked up on, or this was actually thrown into this bill, or this politician had said this 4 years ago and now they're trying to reverse stances. I think there's certainly a distinction in that. And to your question about liberty, I think that's something that we're really grappling with right now. I know my organization, College Republicans, we've been working with the administration on how do we incorporate free speech into the university life, not so much from a legal perspective, because I think that already exists and that has its purpose, but more so what does that look like in the contemporary, and how does that play out when we're interacting with one another, which kind of goes along with a lot of what we've discussed today. And so I think that liberty is important because there is that freedom of expression without freedom of, there's still freedom of consequence. So what that looks like and how that is enforced, I think is really, I don't think there's a clear answer on that just yet. I think that's something that as a country we are working through and kind of figuring out. There's been a lot of discussion around this in the past, I don't even want to, probably like 10 years now. And so that's something that we're all working towards, and it happens on multiple levels, university level, national level, even on an individual level of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say.
I think a big part is going back to we shouldn't be lecturing people. Zoran Mamdani presented new ideas. He presented a vision for folks, not just we oppose this person, we oppose that. And I think the more that in politics we do a good job at convincing folks why our side's ideas are the best way forward, rather than, no, we're telling you this is the best way forward, I think is not only healthy for our democracy, but just healthy for our society. And then on the point of liberty, I think liberty, it's in the Pledge of Allegiance, in liberty and justice for all. So the for all part is where I think we disagree on as a country, because certain folks, whether it be in our state or our federal legislature, like they don't believe in liberty for all. They believe in a two-tiered system of justice, two-tiered system of freedom of the press, where only folks who sign on to allegiances with the government can give their opinion and report on issues, get access to conferences. And so I think that it's important that we just go back to our roots and start paying attention to the Constitution again.
Yeah, and I'll just add, very semantically, like, I don't know if it's forcing your beliefs on other people instead of like forcing the reality or the enactment of your beliefs on people, because they could still believe what they choose. Which brings me to, I feel like liberty, like boiled down, is the ability to respond substantively to something. So not just will something happen, but do you have the power to respond and make change with your response? That's what I would say.
Hi, my name's Ava. I'm a political science here at Pitt. And so my question was, I feel like other Democrats feel that some issues aren't just political issues, but actually like human rights issues. So I was just wondering how we go out respectfully in conversations that when it feels like the other side may be fundamentally denying human rights.
Is there an example, just so we can dig in, like an issue that you feel goes in that direction? I mean, I think this gets back to a lot of what we've been saying, that if human rights is something that in someone's view is being threatened, whether it's their human rights or it's a community they care about, then that should be very much on the table for conversation. And I think, I mean, I don't know all about you, but I think that then in the opposite direction, I think someone should empathize and realize that they're saying something that is threatening someone's human rights and own that. But then insofar as the person who feels like your human rights are being threatened feels safe to stay in the conversation, and as I said, that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to draw boundaries, but you could ask questions and just say, your position on X feels like you're threatening my human rights or the human rights of someone I care deeply about, but I'm curious to know why you believe so passionately in this. I think, like, own the feeling and own the vulnerability, and if it feels like you want to stay in the conversation, have an interest in being there, ask questions.
I think it's important to acknowledge that no matter what we do, there's always going to be hatred. There's always going to be bigotry in society, whether we like it or not. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to find other ways to bring people into our tent. we have to find other ways for them to empathize with our policies. And in turn, I think that whenever we're doing things as a Democratic Party for folks that actually make a meaningful change in their life, whether that be putting money in their pockets, giving them better access to healthcare, food, housing, I think that that's how we bring those people into the big tent. And I think whenever everyone's doing well, it's a lot harder to, get down on a level and be like, I don't believe this group has the right to exist. Get this group out of the country. It's always us versus them. And I think, again, like when you make sure policy benefits everyone, makes everyone's lives better, it makes it harder to bring it down to the level of hate and divide that is seen today in our country.
Yeah, I would just emphasize the point of asking questions. I think it can be a little bit hard to address this question without an example, because a lot of times that does happen, that response builds up. And I think it goes back to what we were saying of that sort of how dare you moment where it feels like something is really like touching a point within you of it's an emotional response. And I think that we need to kind of get into that, okay, well, why? Like we need to get into that understanding, and that's kind of how it breaks down, because if it stops there of just, I think that this is against human rights, or I feel like this is an attack on me personally, that's when conversation stops. And when conversation stops, that's when the violence happens. And so I think we need to, as a society, talk about that more as to, well, why is that response being dwelled up within me? Let's understand why. Let's talk about it. And I think that'll help both sides better understand where the other person's coming from.
Hi, my name is Diana Novak, and I'm currently undeclared, but I'm looking into the public policy undergraduate. And my question for you is, we talk a lot about the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, but when there are disputes within the party, do you find it harder to dispute them, or do you handle it the same way that you handle an inter-party dispute between the Republicans and the Democrats?
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, great. I had this a lot with kind of going back to the very first discussion about Charlie Kirk. I found that a lot of the people in my life who I share a similar belief with, we had very different feelings on it. And I genuinely did go about it the same way that I would with anyone that I have a differing opinion. It's like I have my belief and I can hold true to my belief, and I can also hear your opinion, and I can try to understand why you feel the way that you do. And maybe we can find a common ground. Maybe we both agree on this part and focusing on those things and having those discussions. But it's true, like the two-party system, as we spoke about earlier, is not really conducive to like the many thoughts that people have on politics. And you're going to find that even your friends who, you're both D's or you're both R's, you're going to have different opinions, and that's really natural. And I try to approach it the same way that I do with someone who would be of an opposite political party.
I know that, speaking personally, sometimes the inter-party conversations are a lot harder, because these are folks that that you work with, sometimes that you lead with, and people that you're going to work with for the rest of your life. And so folks can feel very passionately about the way a campaign should be run, or the way that the messaging should go out, things like that. And those conversations can sometimes actually be harder than talking to the other side, because at least like with the other side, we go into it knowing like, okay, we're not going to disagree, or we're not going to agree on a lot. And it makes it hard sometimes whenever everyone wants to see the same results, but the question of how do we get there, it brings a lot of tension within the party. For example, recently, David Hogg, one of the vice chairs of the DNC, was kicked off of leadership because he didn't agree with certain things, and the party didn't agree with what he was doing outside of party leadership. And that was a huge fight. And sometimes it can feel like we are fighting each other whenever it comes to this stuff, more than we're fighting the other side or fighting corporate interest. And we really need to realize that we're all in it for the same solutions here to the problems of everyday Americans.
Hi, we have a question down here. Hi, my name is Anna Roth. I'm the Graduate Department of Occupational Therapy. I'm curious if anybody that you've been speaking to, either in your own party or with somebody that you just disagreed with, has changed your minds? If they did, how did they do it? And if they didn't, why were they unable to?
This for me gets to the question about human rights. When I was first covering the question of bathroom access and gender, I assumed that anyone who wanted to deny bathroom access was bigoted and was denying someone's human rights, until I started interviewing people. And sometimes I would interview like a father who was like, didn't know a lot about the issue, but his first reaction was, I'm afraid for my young daughter to be in a bathroom and what she might experience there. And I think that he very quickly, like, I might have dismissed him as ignorant, bigoted, and actually he was being a concerned dad. And it struck me that was a place where the conversation could continue, that you could actually say, you're being a concerned father, but there's another parent here who wants their daughter to be able to use the bathroom where they feel like they're themselves, and there's room there to not jump to judgment. And I think that was the earliest example I remember of having that initial reaction that there's a policy or a viewpoint that feels like it's infringing on someone's human rights, but that there might be some other motivation to explore, and that someone might be bringing a good faith thing in their own life to the table, and maybe there's a way to keep the conversation going. And I've thought about that example a lot since that issue first came up, covering it in North Carolina like more than a decade ago. And I try to kind of stay in that place as much as I can.
We have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Miles. I'm an undergrad psych major, and my question is, how do you guys navigate being challenged by claims that your stances are based off of misinformation?
Hello. Okay. You said misinformation was the last part of what you said. Yeah. I think that happens a lot on both sides, especially in this day and age. It goes back to the conversation about social media. And so when you're being challenged about misinformation in particular, I think you first start with, well, like, why? Why do you think that this is misinformation? Is it coming from an emotional response? Is it coming from, I saw another study that cited this another way? So I think you have to understand where that arises in the first place. And then you start to look into, okay, well, what is my study saying? How is it framing X, Y, or Z? And how might another study frame this? And kind of comparing the two and trying your best to find the most reliable, unbiased source. And obviously that gets more challenging as the days go on and as social media is rising. But I think it just comes from a point of, you have to first understand why, and then look at both sides and the sources in particular that are being referenced, and kind of compare the two and see why they differ.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben. I am a graduate student in the Library and Information Science program. To spin off of the social media question we had earlier, I think that repeated in-person interactions can help build trust among people. I think I see you nodding, you all know each other and I think there's some trust that's built there. I wonder if you have ideas on how to encourage that sort of in-person reaction, either on a college campus or in the wider world where, we're more and more separate from each other. Thanks.
I'm sorry, can I clarify real quick? Did you say in-person reaction?
Sorry, in-person interaction.
Oh, yes. Okay. So we kind of go for this at Bridge, except we don't really know each other. It's a lot of strangers, and it's a lot of trust that needs to be placed in those strangers to open up about your political opinions in a room of people who believe different things. It's a vulnerable exercise. So something that we do, and this doesn't always apply in real life, but we use moderation, and pretty aggressive moderation at that, because sometimes it helps to feel like there's an authority who is independent and can kind of regulate that conversation. So in addition to kind of getting to know each other, we also do regulate the conversation and just temper everyone's worst instincts maybe. And then when people get to know each other, then the conversation flows a little bit more naturally. And I think that David's kind of moderated up here today, and I think it's been really beneficial for this conversation.
Yeah, and I think a big thing is find something in common with those that you disagree with. I know that for me and Jesse, one of the leaders and college Republicans here at Pitt, like, we have in common that we're both from Pittsburgh, we like the Steelers, and we both work in politics. And then that's something to talk about. We face like certain things similarly in our work and everything. And so immediately we have things in common to talk about besides just always focusing on policy. And then I think in a campaign context, it's a lot, you're for sure right, repeated interaction. It makes these conversations easier and makes you trust people more. That's why in campaigns, we try to make multiple passes on the same households that we're targeting in order to earn that trust. So you're 100% right. Repeated interaction is crucial to building trust with your community. And here on Pitt's campus, I know that we have been able to foster that with college Republicans and college Democrats.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I am a political science major here at the University of Pittsburgh. I had a question about political violence. At some point on the stage, one or more of you have condemned political violence. However, I think our country was born out of political violence. Abolition happened through political violence. Civil rights movement happened out of political violence. So when an issue is pertaining to someone's identity, be it race, sex, gender, religion, do we need more than a discussion that is equitable and non-charged? Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, this microphone. So I think that what you're talking about, we were at a point for the revolution, for example, the United States didn't exist yet. We were a part of a greater entity, and those individuals broke away, created their own union with their own constitution and their own rights. With the civil rights movement, there were not things in our constitution that guaranteed rights for those individuals. We're at a point today where those rights are guaranteed in the Constitution, and we have legal means of defending those rights for individuals. And so I think that it's tough today because we're at a point where if you look at every other country in the world, I mean, outside of maybe Europe, if you look at the Middle East, for example, comparatively to the United States, the people in this country, especially women, have far more rights than individuals in other countries. And that's not to say that that's a stopping point, but I think we need to take a step back for a moment and realize how far we have come as a country, that we have the ability to be in the streets, protest, defend what you believe in, fight for your rights. I think it warrants a conversation when there is someone who believes that their existence is threatened, and that might warrant them to then take actions that are violent or physical or whatever it may be, because that's a serious jump. And to make that jump without a justified reason, I personally, just to be flat out honest, I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think that we're at a point in that country. I know that there might be some people that disagree with that, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to agree to disagree. And so that's what I would say to that.
Just quickly, I think whenever, and just use like a comparative or like international example, whenever the state, a nation state is trying to brutalize its people or disenfranchise them and oppress them of their rights, I think that it's important that we stay peaceful, because violence gives the state more of a reason to brutalize us when we're in the fight for rights, when we're in the fight against oppression. And I mean, Martin Luther King is the prime example in American history of someone who reinforced that. And although there was political violence during that time, I think that his sentiments really rang true. And recently, we saw the No Kings protest, largest protests in modern American history, were mostly peaceful, if not completely peaceful across the country. I haven't heard of much political violence that transpired. And I think that it sets a good example for moving forward. I just don't think that there comes a tipping point where we're justified to use that force. If the military thought that the country was out of control, the Constitution was not being followed, that's their prerogative to step in. But in modern society, it's just like the American Revolution would not happen. I don't even think it would be possible, to be honest.
And I just want to add, I think, frankly, I do share your interpretation of history, just that political violence has played a very prominent role in this country's history, both in oppression and revolution. So I think that the way I would look at it, and maybe I'm not the person qualified to look at it, but would be that I don't think that this country's ever had an equitable conversation, and that's maybe why we keep getting political violence. So I would say that I would like to say no more political violence. I would like to say that it's bad for the country, and I do say that, but I think that if we want to prevent it, I think that we need to work on creating an equitable conversation, which I don't know that we've ever had, and that's why we've had political violence.
It's a really good question, because I think that one of the things that happened after Charlie Kirk was this term political violence came resurfaced. Like that to me was not even political violence. That was a political assassination. And it was I think a lot of people went to, if you're going to condemn that, you're condemning all political action. And I don't think that was the case. I condemn that. But I also think that, was the Civil War to end slavery political violence? That to me was political violence that ended in an outcome that I like, is taking to the streets against local ordinances because you want to make your voices heard as passionately as possible, and you might be arrested. That's something I could applaud and maybe even be part of. I'm not sure. Is that political violence? Maybe. I think there's spirited protest has an enormous role in our society. And one thing I want to make sure is clear, as much as I am all about listening and civil discourse and respectful conversation and being at a table in good faith and listening to one another, I am not advocating kumbaya every day of the week. There is a time and place to fight, and to be angry and to be passionate. But I just think that there are ways to do it that never involve violence against individuals who disagree with you. And even if on a given day or a given night, you're going to be on the streets fighting for your rights and fighting against oppression, I think you can also the next day potentially be having coffee with someone who is on the other side and listening. And I hope that there's room for both in our lives.
Hi, my name is Omar. I'm an undergrad studying computational social science. My question was about nationalization and politics. So today, more than ever, I feel like state and local issues are receiving less and less attention in place of, and because of issues are being more nationalized. Do you think that because of the nationalization of politics, do you think more important state and local issues are getting less attention than they should?
Most certainly. We're at a state budget impasse here in Pennsylvania, where that coincided with the federal budget impasse. And I think most Pennsylvanians do not know about it. Polling shows that most Pennsylvanians don't know about that budget impasse. And that's crazy to me. There's so many programs that our lives depend on without even realizing it. The ways that people get to work, healthcare, SNAP, all these different things that unless you're directly affected, you might not realize. And whenever we're hearing about the Epstein files, or we're hearing about, the latest scandal in senatorial campaigns, it drowns out the noise from what really matters. And I think today our local politics matter more than ever, especially our state politics. They matter more than ever. And if you aren't paying attention already, make sure that you are.
Yeah, just kind of echoing what Austin said, I'd agree. I feel like a lot of my friends, they've heard of the federal shutdown, but they don't know that Pennsylvania hasn't passed a budget. Over the summer, I was fortunate enough to work in a congressional office, and constituents would call, and they'd call about lots of things, and they'd have no clue who their state representative was. Sometimes they'd even be honest, and they had no clue who the congresswoman I was working for was. They just Googled, and they didn't know. And I think it's a shame that people don't understand the distinctions in what sections of government refer to what. We have Port Authority here, or what is it now? Regional Transportation, I forget, PRT. And that's a state entity, that's not federal, and we all rely on that. My bus down to downtown every day, and gosh, I'm so annoyed when the bus is late and all the construction in the city, and those are state and local issues, and you should be talking to your state and local representatives about that if you feel like you care passionately about those issues. And it is a shame that people are not more involved locally.
Yeah. So my representative was George Santos. So I got to take part in a little bit of the national fun with my local politics. But I would just add that I think that the nationalization of politics goes along with the, I don't know, I'm going to make up a word, spectacleization of politics, just making them things to watch, spectacles on the news, fireworks. And I think that that's really something that we need to fight against. So in that way, I would say that they do subtract from local politics, but in a bigger way, they subtract from substantive, functional politics.
Can I just say, this is not happening everywhere. Like, this is really impressive. The four of you are super impressive. And it's just an honor to be talking to you up here. And also, like, all of this just is not, like, Pitt is leading the way and stuff like this, and, like, keep coming to conversations like this. I mean, it's really impressive. This isn't happening everywhere.
I think I can speak for the four of us. We all really appreciate you being here today as well.
Yes. Appreciate all of you.
I was going to say, please join me in thanking this amazing panel and having the honor of having David Greene with us today on campus. It is such a great conversation. I really want to commend the panelists for your bravery and your humility and honesty up here. I think that our panelists really have a call to action, which is to hear each other and allow folks to be heard, and to take a step back and hear where someone is coming from. Remember that when you are at your dining room table at Thanksgiving. Speaking of food, there's lots of vitamin C to be had at the back table with fruit. So if you are a student, please help yourself. Don't leave all that there. That is for you. I want to make an announcement that tomorrow we are having the Thornburg session at the law school at 12:30. Russell Muirhead, author and professor of democracy and politics from Dartmouth, will be speaking. There is an evaluation on your table. I'm sure you've already filled it out, but if you haven't, please take a moment to do so. That's your opportunity to help us get better and to tell us what's important to you. And also get a message to the panelists and to David Greene, who are on the stage today, that you might not have had a chance to say. So thank you for being at All Angles. We'll have 2 topical sessions spring term, and I hope to see you all there. Thanks a lot.